For decades, Western Canadian resources traveled south before they could go anywhere else. That wasn't geography. That was infrastructure designed around American control. We're changing that. The Hudson Bay Railway isn't just connecting Churchill to the prairies, it's connecting Canada directly to Europe and bypassing the United States entirely. That was Mark Carney speaking in Winnipeg, November 2025, standing beside Manitoba Premier Wab Kining after announcing $51 million in railway upgrades, not discussing maintaining old infrastructure, but declaring that Canada was constructing a new trade corridor that makes American routes optional instead of mandatory. For over a century, Western Canadian exports had one viable path to global markets, south through the United States. Grain went to American ports, minerals traveled through American railways, even shipments heading to Europe for Asia typically routed through American infrastructure because that's where the capacity existed. The United States collected fees at every transfer point. American logistics companies controlled the scheduling, American ports determined the priorities, and Canadian exporters paid premiums for the privilege of using infrastructure they didn't own and couldn't control. Everyone accepted this arrangement because the alternative, the Hudson Bay Railway running 1,300 kilometers through Permafrost and Muskeg to reach Churchill on the Arctic coast, was chronically underfunded, seasonally limited, and operated at standards that made it barely viable for serious commercial use. Then Trump threatened Canadian sovereignty and pressured Mark Carney into power specifically to resist American influence. And Carney looked at a railway that everyone had dismissed and saw something different. A direct route from the Canadian prairies to European markets, a corridor that could handle grain, fertilizer, critical minerals, and energy without touching American soil or paying American fees. Tonight we're showing you how Canada is upgrading 1,300 kilometers of Arctic railway to Class 1 standards, how $262 million in federal and provincial investment is unlocking a trade corridor worth hundreds of billions over the next decade, and how the Hudson Bay Railway that American logistics companies dismissed as irrelevant is about to become the route that costs them billions in lost business. But first, if you appreciate this analysis, please like the video and subscribe. 90 years of failure. The Hudson Bay Railway has been Canada's most spectacular infrastructure failure for 90 years. Built in the 1920s and 30s to connect prairie grain producers directly to European markets through Churchill, the promise was simple. Bypass expensive American ports and the Panama Canal, ship directly across Hudson Bay and the Atlantic. It never worked as planned. The challenges. The railway crossed some of the most challenging terrain in North America. Permafrost that shifted seasonally, muskeg that swallowed tracks, extreme cold that cracked steel, flooding that washed out entire sections. Maintenance was expensive and constant. The shipping season through Hudson Bay was limited, maybe 4 months of relatively ice-free conditions. Churchill lacked the port infrastructure to handle large volumes, and prairie farmers could get their grain to market faster through established southern routes, even if it cost more. The dollar sale. By the 1990s, the federal government was actively trying to dispose of it. They sold the railway and port to a private American company called Omnitrax for $1. Not $1 million, $1. That tells you everything about how little value anyone perceived. Omnitrax ran it into further decline, minimal investment, deferred maintenance. When major flooding washed out the line in 2017, they essentially abandoned it. The railway sat unusable for over a year. Churchill was cut off from surface transportation entirely. Indigenous ownership. In 2018, a consortium of 41 First Nations communities in northern Manitoba towns purchased the railway and port. Arctic Gateway Group. Most analysts viewed it as a symbolic gesture, Indigenous ownership of infrastructure that had no commercial future. What nobody anticipated was that 5 years later, the strategic calculus would shift so dramatically that the railway everyone dismissed would suddenly become essential to Canadian trade independence. The Class 1 upgrade. Railways in North America are classified by track quality and load capacity. Class 1 is the highest standard. Heavy freight, high speeds, maximum efficiency. Most major freight lines in Canada and the United States operate at or near Class 1 standards.
The Hudson Bay Railway was nowhere close. It operated at lower classification with significant weight restrictions. You couldn't run the kind of heavy unit trains that move serious quantities of grain or minerals. The track conditions limited speeds. The infrastructure couldn't handle modern freight volumes.
The $262 million transformation. In November 2025, Manitoba and the federal government announced $262 million specifically to upgrade the Hudson Bay Railway to Class 1 standards. This isn't routine maintenance, this is complete reconstruction. New roadbed to stabilize tracks over permafrost, modern rail and ties rated for heavy loads, upgraded bridges and culverts, advanced monitoring systems using ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR, drones, and artificial intelligence to track conditions in real time. The practical impact? The practical impact is transformative. Heavy freight cars currently too heavy for the line, carrying bulk minerals, large equipment, dense cargo, will be able to use the route. Unit trains hauling grain or potash in the volumes that make economic sense can reach Churchill. The railway becomes capable of handling the kind of traffic that actually competes with established southern routes. And critically, Class 1 standards mean reliability. Companies making long-term logistics decisions need to know the infrastructure won't fail. Upgrading to Class 1 sends a signal to the private sector that this railway is permanent, capable, and ready for serious commercial use. Strategic purpose. Arctic Gateway Group isn't shy about the strategic purpose. Chris Avery, the CEO, stated explicitly, "We're setting the stage for a new era of growth that unlocks the trade and transportation potential of Canada's Arctic Trade Corridor to serve the Canadian national interest." Not prairie interests, not northern Manitoba development, Canadian national interest. This is infrastructure with strategic purpose. So what moves north on a Class 1 railway to Churchill that justifies $262 million in upgrades? First, grain. Saskatchewan and Manitoba produce massive volumes of wheat, canola, and specialty crops. Currently, almost all of it goes through Vancouver or American ports. Churchill offers a significantly shorter route to European markets. Upgrading the railway means unit trains carrying thousands of tons can reach Churchill efficiently. With expanded port capacity and extended shipping seasons through icebreaker support, grain exports through Churchill could reach millions of tons annually. Second, potash. Saskatchewan dominates global potash production. 95% goes to exports. Currently, most potash travels through American logistics networks to reach international buyers. Genesis Fertilizers has already signed agreements to route imports and exports through Churchill. Class 1 railway standards mean heavy potash loads can move efficiently. Every ton of potash shipped through Churchill is a ton not generating fees for American infrastructure. Third, critical minerals. Northern Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Quebec have massive deposits of nickel, lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements. Getting these minerals to market has historically been prohibitively expensive because of infrastructure limitations. Churchill, with Class 1 railway access, changes the economics completely. Mine operators can ship bulk minerals directly to European refineries without routing through American facilities. Arctic Gateway Group has already built new critical mineral storage at Churchill and shipped supplies to Europe for 2 consecutive seasons. Fourth, energy. The Port of Churchill Plus proposal includes an energy corridor, potentially for liquefied natural gas, hydrogen in the form of ammonia, or electricity transmission to northern communities. Class 1 railway standards support the heavy equipment and materials needed to build this infrastructure. Alberta has proposed an energy corridor to Churchill. If built, Western Canadian energy reaches European and Asian markets without touching American infrastructure. Fifth, Arctic resupply. Nunavut communities depend on seasonal supply ships. Churchill is the logistics hub. Everything from construction equipment to food supplies stages through Churchill for distribution north. Improved railway capacity means more efficient resupply operations, reducing costs for northern communities and strengthening Canadian Arctic presence. Breaking American dependence. Add it up, and you're looking at tens of millions of tons annually flowing through infrastructure that completely bypasses American control. The United States doesn't lose every shipment. Some trade will always use established southern routes. They're still faster for certain destinations, and Vancouver remains crucial for Pacific markets. But what American logistics companies are losing is mandatory dependence, the new reality. For decades, Western Canadian exporters had no real alternative to southern routes. If you wanted to move large volumes to global markets, you used American infrastructure and paid American fees. Churchill, with a Class I railway, eliminates that monopoly. Saskatchewan grain producers can choose, ship through Vancouver or American ports and pay their premiums, or route through Churchill with shorter distances to Europe and no American intermediaries. The choice exists now, and once companies start using Churchill and discover the economics work, they don't switch back just because American ports offer discounts. The revenue shift. Manitoba fertilizer companies can import phosphate through Churchill instead of American ports. Canadian critical mineral operations can export directly to European buyers through Churchill instead of routing through American refineries. Alberta Energy potentially reaches markets through Hudson Bay instead of American export terminals. Every ton that shifts to Churchill is revenue American companies no longer collect. Port fees, railway charges, logistics premiums, storage costs. The entire American transportation industry in border states has profited from Canadian dependence for over a century. That profit stream is about to diminish substantially, and there's no way for the United States to prevent it. This isn't a tariff Canada can retaliate against. It's not a trade dispute America can bring to international arbitration. It's simply Canada investing in its own infrastructure and choosing to route Canadian products through Canadian territory. Trump can threaten all he wants, but he can't stop a railway upgrade in Manitoba. He can't prevent grain from shipping through Churchill. He can't force Canadian companies to use American logistics networks if they have better alternatives.
Solving the permafrost problem. The obvious question is, if the Hudson Bay Railway is so strategically valuable, why has it been a failure for 90 years? Permafrost. The northern sections of the railway cross terrain where the ground is permanently frozen, except permanently is misleading. Permafrost shifts with seasonal temperature changes and is increasingly unstable due to climate change. Traditional railway construction doesn't work. Lay track on permafrost and it buckles as the ground shifts. Sinkholes appear. Sections wash out. The maintenance costs are astronomical because you're constantly repairing damage from ground movement. Technology solutions. Arctic Gateway Group solved this with technology that didn't exist when the railway was originally built. Ground-penetrating radar maps subsurface conditions. LiDAR creates detailed three-dimensional models of track geometry. Drones conduct regular inspections, identifying problems before they become failures. GPS-tracked maintenance schedules work systematically instead of reactively. Land-based sensors monitor ground movement continuously. Artificial intelligence analyzes all the data to predict where problems will develop. This isn't maintenance, it's predictive infrastructure management. The railway knows where weaknesses are developing before track fails. Crews can address problems during scheduled windows instead of emergency shutdowns. The result is that the Hudson Bay Railway is now in the best condition in 30 years, despite crossing terrain that has destroyed previous track. Climate change, ironically, is helping. The shipping season through Hudson Bay is extending as ice coverage decreases. Churchill operated 4 months historically. Now it's approaching 5 or 6, with icebreaker support potentially enabling year-round operations. Permafrost is less stable, but modern technology handles that better than historical methods did.
The combination of upgraded track standards, advanced monitoring, and longer shipping seasons means the fundamental economics have shifted. What was marginally viable 90 years ago is genuinely competitive today. Beyond infrastructure. This is about more than railways and ports. It's about Canada demonstrating that American infrastructure isn't indispensable. For generations, Western Canadian exports depended on American routes because no alternatives existed. That dependence gave the United States leverage. Threaten access or raise fees, and Canadian exporters had limited options. Trump's tariff threats didn't make Canada weaker, they made alternatives economically compelling. Investing $262 million in a railway through muskeg and permafrost looks irrational until you realize it eliminates billions in payments to American logistics companies and removes American leverage over Canadian trade.
The evidence. Every grain shipment through Churchill instead of American ports is proof that Canadian companies can function independently. Every mineral export that bypasses American refineries demonstrates that supply chains can work without American intermediation. Every dollar of investment in northern infrastructure is a dollar reducing future American leverage. And this isn't just Manitoba, or even just Canada. Other countries are watching. If Canada can successfully build trade infrastructure that bypasses American control, why can't they? The precedent matters far beyond the specific railway being upgraded. The strategic achievement. The Hudson Bay Railway that everyone dismissed as a historical artifact is becoming the corridor that proves Canadian independence isn't just rhetoric, it's infrastructure being built, operated, and used to move billions in trade without American permission. Trump wanted to demonstrate that Canada had nowhere else to go. Instead, he gave Canada the motivation to go north, literally, to invest in infrastructure that everyone knew existed but nobody thought was worth the cost of making functional. What $262 million buys? $262 million buys a lot more than railway upgrades. It buys optionality, the ability to choose routes based on economics rather than necessity. The strategic independence that comes from controlling your own supply chains instead of depending on someone else's. American logistics companies in border states are watching the tonnage projections and doing the math. The grain that used to flow south, the minerals that used to route through American facilities, the fees and charges and premiums that added up to billions annually. All of it potentially shifting to a railway that runs north to Churchill and then directly across the ocean to European markets, bypassing American infrastructure entirely. And there's nothing Washington can do except watch the trade they assumed was locked in place find a different route. The Hudson Bay Railway isn't just connecting the prairies to the Arctic coast, it's connecting Canadian independence to European markets, and proving that when you threaten an ally's sovereignty, they build alternatives you can't stop.